In this video, I'm going to be talking much more about individuality and the importance of individuality and how being an individual is actually conducive to ultimately greater psychological sustainability and optimizing our wellness infrastructure and infrastructuring in particular. And when you take something like a drink of water, you're showing yourself in some ways a stepping stone of meaning that goes a long way to take care of yourself, but not necessarily is conducive to self-compassion or even self-love. What requires you to engage more meaningfully in a self-compassionate process is actually to think about the underlying meanings that are most conducive to your necessitated needs and your psychological needs. And being able to properly identify your psychological needs is going to be ultimately what's important for maintaining optimal psychological sustainability and psychological wellness infrastructuring and optimizing our infrastructuring of the self. And that's a central component and most necessary in the well-defined psychological sustainability that I have instantiated as a meaningful term that can help to capture a whole aspect of what allows us to not just live optimally, but live a meaningful life. And psychological sustainability is all about living a meaningful life. And it's all about also authenticity and being more true to yourself. And self-love is a major component about that. And being able to know what gives your life meaning and what creates meaning in your life. And it's not just what creates meaning in your life, what creates a meaningfulness process, because not everybody actually experiences a meaningfulness process in their lives. And you might think, well, aren't we all the same? Well, no, in fact, we're all different. And to get to that meaningfulness, you actually have to engage a maturation of both knowledge and meaningful emotion. And that requires us to engage higher order cognitions and higher order emotions that are what are engaged through experiential learnings and our direct perceptions that require us to engage agency and take up responsibility to do so, and to engage in the tasks, say, that we enjoy to do, and not just that we have to do, but ones that we have a psychological need or that tap into our psychological needs and also our psychological motivations in particular that pertain more to, say, our interests and aspirations. And a good example of this would be playing, say, an instrument or drawing. And I find particularly doing comics to be one of those things that have a lot of emergent emotions. And even at a young age, I was somebody who tended to doodle a lot in class, and particularly create these comics where I'd do these cartoon figures that I was trying to really capture various elements of my daily experience, but not seriously, and to really also create these. I was trying to think of, okay, what couldn't possibly exist, and could I give it life and try to make it exist? Not just real, but really true. Could I create it and bring it into existence from my mind with my doodling pen and graphite to a page and even marker, pen? And I like to eventually explore color. And what I found is in subsequent moments, I took very much to creating meaningful emotions that corresponded to the recognition and realization of how beautiful words were and the symbol of words as you wrote them, and that they had an aesthetic look. And really playing around with different just lines themselves was just very meaningful. And noticing that sometimes when you draw something, it can seem more really true as we create configurations of it that you wouldn't otherwise find anywhere else. And a good example of this is really broad, bold edges. When you have really broad, bold edges, and cartoonists are masterful at this, they tend to really draw in people and look. People tend to look longer at images that have these black borders around them, or darkened borders, or particularly what are bold edges and perimeters around figures, different figures. And that, you might think that, okay, wouldn't what draws people into particular different scenes or imagery be something that's more realistic and something that's more familiar? But actually it's quite opposite. It's what's divergent and what tends to break our expectations, but also tends to bring in familiarity. And a good characterization is not something that's just, say, completely radically different or that's hyper realistic, but rather it's a combination of what's familiar, but also what's different and unique about an individual's art style, which you couldn't get anywhere else. And you find that paintings, the most valuable paintings, what makes it truly colorful and resonate with the internal chords of an individual's meaningful emotion, is that you can't find that anywhere else. And it's priceless in that sense and temporaneous, because the artwork is originating from a subjective experience that's forming these ultimate psychological truths of existence bound to that artist. And that comes from a meaningful place and necessitating that meaning and being able to develop a knowledge that comes from self-love in a form of self-compassion. And it's actually a myth. Like, some the true best artists out there are not individuals who are, say, depressed. And if they're depressed or experiencing negative emotion, it's often because people have breached their privacy or damaged their intellectual property, and that can be very destabilizing. And that is a manner of attacking somebody's meaningful emotion in an unconscionable, unjust, and unfair way. And there's a reason why those have been sources for legal philosophy to develop instantiations and to legislate against and to take highly seriously and to create penalties for violations and breaches of a person's intellectual property and ultimately privacy, because you can't get that anywhere else, and it destabilizes people. It can disrupt their physical, psychological health and capacity to function in society, to even be able to work or to attend any form of, say, educational program, or to even socially function effectively. And the value of artwork to another compared to the originator is always going to be less meaningful, because there's some superficial element to that relationship. It's not the same. It doesn't originate from the same emotions or cognitions, and nor could it possibly. The most probabilistic individual to experience the most meaningful individual is going to be the originator of those meaningful emotions and thinking. And they're the best intellectual authority on the manner of their own artwork and creative work, intellectual work, because they're the originators of it. And they can conjure up the most accessible knowledge and terms in regards to what they've done and how they were feeling, say, at the time that they created that work, and the meanings of their affects and why they were inspired particularly to do that. And even if you, say, go look at a photograph in a gallery or art gallery, what you'll find is that there are captions and descriptions and sometimes these little small essays that are bringing to life not just the image, but putting words to a picture that broaden out and help to guide interpreters into the true value and wisdom of their artwork and creation. And if it wasn't for something like individuality, that beauty that really resonates with optimizing our meaningful emotions that are emergent through that creative process of artistic work, that can take in what we resonate and actually is most connective to the meaningful emotions within, in a translation process of beauty and sublimation in regards to being able to access the sublime through our direct sensory inputs and direct perceptions and output that in a meaningful way that has to impact our nervous system meaningfully and form these subjective-objective relationships through our direct mental representations of the mind in direct relation to the body and behavior, and which pertain to the working mind and what the working mind ultimately develops, elaborates, and maturations knowledge in regards to subjective truths that are forged as the blacksmith of ideas creates them. And that's all I wanted to say for this video. I hope you have an awesome possum one and you rock your socks off.